Gone Girl is one of the more unpleasant films that I've seen lately, and considering that this was made by the same guy who directed Seven, that should say a lot. Nick Dunn is a young man living in Missouri, and one day he discovers that his wife is missing from their home. He calls the police and a search begins, and we're treated to flashbacks into the married couple's history. Over the course of the movie, sympathy turns against Nick, and people begin to suspect that he murdered Amy himself. The film is a taut thriller, revealing many twists as the story goes along, and it's revealed just how cold and loveless their marriage became over time, and just how much things are not what they seem. In technical aspects, this film is really well made. It's got a good soundtrack, it's well filmed, and it's well edited. David Fincher knows how to make movies, and he knows how to make them look good. The problem for me is the story itself. This is a dark and coldly detached film. Now obviously this was the intention, so in that case it's a success on the film's part. But personally, I just could not enjoy the film like I enjoyed a dark movie like The Proposition or Seven. The reason being that almost everyone is written in a very one-note sort of way. The supporting characters are almost all incredibly shallow and unlikable, while the two leads are even worse. The dialogue goes from realistic at times to being absolutely impossible to take seriously, especially in the case of Rosamund Pike's character and Neil Patrick Harris's character. In fact, the only three people whose performances I actually got invested in were those by Kim Dickens, Carrie Coon, and most surprising of all, Tyler Perry. And that's not to say the other actors are not trying or not doing well. They are. It's just that their characters were either underwritten or written in ways that I either despised them or just didn't care about them at all. There's a danger with making a dark and cynical film. Sometimes it goes too far. Now, of course, this is an entirely subjective thing. Everyone has their limits. And in my case, I just didn't like sitting through this film. It dragged on and on, showing these unlikable protagonists, and the final act is so full of convenient things happening that I just wanted the story to end and be done with it. And for those of you asking how I can love a movie like Seven and dislike a movie like Gone Girl, despite both being dark crime films directed by David Fincher, here's the thing. Seven was, and still is, one of my all-time favorite movies, because not only is it dark and cynical, it's a great story about two interesting and well-written characters trying to stop a well-developed evil killer. The two detectives are flawed, but they're ultimately people I could believe and relate to. They weren't cliches, they were human beings who had goals and philosophies, and flaws. John Doe is over the top and scary, but at the very least he occasionally sounds like what I think would happen if an unbalanced man took things too far. And because he only shows up in the last act, less was more, and we could enjoy the contrast between himself and the men trying to hunt him down. In Gone Girl, there are virtually no characters I really identified with and could care for. Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike play their characters very well, but they're both very cold, unemotional, and extremely flawed people who do terrible things to themselves and each other, and it just wasn't interesting after a while. And as I hinted before, they sounded less like actual people and more like artificial constructions of what the plot needed them to be at the given time. Now, like I said before, the film is technically well made. And granted, some things about it were very interesting. The development of a witch hunt through the media and public opinion, the idea of appearance versus reality, the attempts to show a modern-day marriage in troubled times, it was all there. But it got bogged down in story that I just couldn't invest myself into, and ultimately I just wished it would end.